Hey guys, it's Ettore. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to ask you something. What's your story? We all have one, and sometimes it takes the right space and a little guidance to bring that story to life. That's why I created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. It's a unique space for men to explore their identities, reflect on personal experiences, and use writing as a tool for self-discovery. Whether you're an experienced writer or have never written a word, this workshop is for you. Join me and other like-minded men on this journey. Visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more. Thanks. And now on to today's episode. What if the journey to overcoming your biggest challenges didn't just require strength of will, but also a shift in mindset? What if the key to recovery was hidden in the same techniques that teach us to defend ourselves? Today, we're stepping into a world where the art of self-mastery meets the fight against addiction, anxiety, and depression. Our guest is not your typical counselor. He's a black belt in American Kenpo who has taken the powerful principles of martial arts and applied them to mental wellness. His name is Eric Fisher, and his book, The Martial Art of Recovery, offers a fresh perspective on how we can strike down self-sabotage and embrace a life of balance, discipline, and self-love. In this episode, you'll hear how Eric connects the dots between martial arts and mental health, offering tools that anyone, regardless of their background, can use to navigate life's toughest battles. So whether you're struggling with addiction, searching for inner peace, or simply curious about a different approach to self-care, you're sure to enjoy this conversation. So let's get on the road. Welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast.
We started this podcast to share our stories and hear from others about their adventures in men's work.
Join us on the journey to our fully authentic selves, emotional healing, and the meaning of modern masculinity.
Here on Authenticity Road.
Hello, and welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast. I am Ettore, and this week on the podcast, we are quite pleased to have as our guest Canadian certified counselor and author Eric Fisher. His book, The Martial Art of Recovery, Self-Mastery Practices to Subdue Addiction and Achieve Mental Wellness, offers a unique metaphorical approach to treating addiction, anxiety, depression, and trauma. He applies techniques and concepts from American Kenpo, a martial arts style, as an approach to mental health and addiction treatment. As Eric says, striking self-sabotage begins with a single move. Eric has training and certifications in a variety of modalities and is quite passionate about the opportunity to contribute to people's journeys in a meaningful way. Eric, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything I've left out or anything else you'd like folks to know before we kick it off?
I don't think so, Tor. Thank you very much for the introduction. Glad to be here today.
Yeah, we are delighted to have you. Your book, The Martial Art of Recovery. Tell me a little bit about how you got there, what it is, what it means. What is the martial art of recovery?
How I got there. Let's see. Let's go back a few years. So what I was doing was I was working in an inpatient treatment unit. I've been doing therapy for over 13 years now. And at a certain point, I wanted to look into how can I better find some approaches that are metaphorical, simplified, make sense, that they don't have the, usually counseling or psychological jargon. And so I started to look at my martial arts background and I was like, wait, maybe there's some similarities. Maybe there's some metaphor, some concepts, some images related to the martial arts that I can employ when it comes to psychology, to therapy, to counseling, when it comes to addiction, but also depression, anxiety, trauma, a lot of different things. And so I just started to look at this manuals, and that I was able to get permission to actually use in the book from Eric and Kevin Lampkin. So Eric and Kevin Lampkin, thank you very much, out of Kentucky. And without the content there, I would not have been able to write the book really, because so much of it comes from quite a few manuals, like over 8 different manuals. So yes, I was able to start to translate these different martial arts techniques and terms from American Kenpo and bring them into the counseling field when it comes to addiction and also some mental health concerns.
Cool. So, a couple of things. First of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room. You are sporting what I would not consider a Calgary, Alberta accent.
Guilty as charged.
And so you came to Calgary by way of, you had told me this before, but I've forgotten. You grew up in...
I grew up in the United States. I grew up in Tennessee. Yeah. So I've been up here since August of 2014. So it's coming up on 10 years this month.
Wow. Great.
Yeah.
So when you say about the Lampkins manuals, what were these manuals geared toward? What did they describe that you were using?
So the manuals were familiar to me because they're all concentrated on American Kenpo, the martial art. And so I had trained for 2 years, ages 16 to 18, getting my black belt in American Kenpo. And so the concepts, the terms, the techniques, the stances, all that terminology, I was, very much understandable with.
Yeah.
There was, of course, there was a lot that I didn't know about, and I was able to use that information as well.
Cool. So for those of us like me who have never heard of American Kenpo before, how is that different from other martial arts?
Yeah, so we think of different martial arts like Taekwondo, which uses a lot of like foot arrangements or feet work, uses a lot of kicks. When it comes to American Kenpo, it's all about pressure points. And so a person, when they're defending themselves, is striking different pressure points on the body. There's one behind the ear. There's one like at the bridge of the lip. There's just different places for that. And a part of the study and a part of the actual defensive techniques is either striking or when defending using those pressure points.
Okay. So that helps a lot because, I have seen, I'm familiar with quite a few different ones. That was not one that I'd ever even heard of before. Before I read the description of your book, I had never even heard of American Kenpo before.
It's not one of the more well-known ones. It's not like Muay Thai or Taekwondo or Jiu-Jitsu. I did a little bit of Jiu-Jitsu too when I did the American Kenpo. That's a lot of takedowns and locks and things like that. Yeah. A lot of grappling. So, I'm not surprised. And I didn't know too much about it either until I started learning the art. And it's exceptional. Yeah.
How did you locate it or come across it at such a young age? Because you were only 16 when you started.
My dad and I started when I was 16. So I think he was the one that sought it out. I'm trying to look back. It's been a few years. It's been over 20 years now. But when I was 16, we started going to the dojo on Main Street in a very small Tennessee town. And the sensei, the teacher, was if it is such a thing, an ex-Marine. So used to be in the Marines. Again, is there such a thing?
Is there such a thing?
Yeah, over 6 foot tall. And he was very well versed, very experienced, learned so much from him. Yeah.
Cool. And so then elsewhere on your journey, you became involved in helping people with their mental health. You, when you lived in the United States, you were a mental health professional, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And you brought that with you to Canada. When did it occur to you that there was some similarity between what you were trying to accomplish in helping people heal their mental health or improve their mental health and the skills that you had learned in your Kenpo training?
Honestly, it was only until a few years ago that I put the two and two together. It had always been a way of life for me after I'd finished the training, because I have a black belt in Waterloo and a black belt in American Kenpo. And because of the over 4 years of training I've had, it's kind of like mindfulness training. It's not just like doing the meditation or the mindfulness techniques, and that's the only time I'm practicing mindfulness. It's a daily walk with mindfulness. So it's a daily walk for me with martial arts when it comes to spatial awareness or respect or discipline or self-control. So a lot of those pieces are embedded in me finding the balance between yin and yang, the extremes is a part of it too. So I've just been able to incorporate those as time has went on. So in a way, indirectly, I was bringing that into the counseling practice, but it's only been in the last few years where I've actually started to bring in these actual like translated techniques and actually bring them into like addiction support or with mental health support.
Yeah. So let's go there then. What does this look like in real terms? What are the skill sets that you're teaching people, and how do they apply them to their lives?
Yeah, and so in the book, I start with what's called the white belt. And in American Kenpo, I don't believe I ever like had techniques I had to learn for white belt. It started with yellow. So I had to really just conjure up some that come from other belts in the American Kenpo system. And it's interesting because actually we didn't really wear like belt colors in American Kenpo. It was more about the learning than the actual color of the belt. When I did the other martial art, yes, very much. So I say all that to say that the first technique that I was able to create for the quote unquote white belt is coming from a martial art technique called thundering hammers. And I translate that to thundering uncertainty. And so it's all about learning how to deal with uncertainty, and actually maybe even seeing uncertainty as a way to learn something, not seeing uncertainty as necessarily an enemy, being able to get, curious about that. So that would be the first of the 66 different techniques on that journey. And of course, it's not like I do one of these techniques, go through what's in the book as far as a structured approach with questions and actionable items. We're like, oh, I'm good with uncertainty now. No more uncertainty. I might go back to that, work on it at another time. Yet that's the first technique. Yeah.
And there are 66 techniques.
Yeah. The last one's called the denial breaker, which a lot of people might be like, why is the denial breaker the last technique and what would be the black belt section? Wouldn't that be maybe in the white belt section? However, for anybody that struggled with anything, whether it's addiction or even trauma or grief that something has happened, that maybe I've lost something or someone. Denial is not something that necessarily just crops up once and then it's over, especially for addiction. That could creep up over and over again. The acronym "Don't Even Know I'm Lying" can continue to come up for me. Yeah.
So as you step through these 66 different techniques, do they increase in difficulty? Is there a reason that they're in the order that they're in? Because, for example, you had mentioned mindfulness. And so, I mean, I imagine there are some pieces of a mindfulness practice that are more difficult or become easier as you advance. But at the same time, I almost kind of feel like they're all equally difficult. They're all, living in a mindful way, as a practice, requires, just requires that you do all of the things as part of your practice. But I wouldn't necessarily say that you step through things in an order of difficulty. And so I'm curious, as you're working with someone or as someone reads the book, is it intentional that, you're challenging them step by step to up their game? How does this work? What does this look like?
Yeah, and so there is a certain semblance of degree of difficulty or challenge or intensity when it comes to these techniques. So I'll give you an example. So in the white belt techniques, like I mentioned, thundering uncertainty, repeated confusion, and I'm just going to give the translated terms, not just the martial art terms. So courting the curiosity, encounter with avoidance, flashing hope, capturing the confidence. So those are some of the ones in the white belt. Yet when we go all the way to the black belt, we do see that it's things like thundering actualization. And so that's definitely something that would not be at the outset, because when I'm talking about self-actualization, it's getting to that place where I've got my basic needs met. I'm able to have those social connections. I've been able to, develop some self-worth, self-esteem, have that worked on, and then to get to a place where I am becoming more self-actualized. I'm getting to a place where I'm at the innermost and just uppermost peak of my authentic self for what I know about me. And that is not going to happen. It's not going to happen at the beginning. So there's that. And then there's heavenly serenity, which is one of the last ones. And that's definitely not going to come at the beginning. That's going to serenity, even amidst the storms. So all the different techniques before this heavenly serenity helps me to find that serenity even when there is challenges. And then clipping the regret, and then finally the denial breaker. I'm not doing all the different ones in the black belt.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. No. We only have so much time, and there's 66.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't ask you to. Well, I wouldn't ask you to give away the book for free anyway here on the podcast. But so now, draw the connection for me between these techniques and improving or changing one's mental health.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're looking at coming more into the self, the authentic self, the true self with addiction. And I'll just use addiction as the example because that's the main focus of the book. I do go into depression, anxiety, and trauma. With addiction, a person loses that sense of themselves often. They get disconnected from themselves. We especially see that with depression too, which can often co-occur with addiction. And so what we're trying to do with the techniques is bringing back into place those different aspects to bring me into a more unified whole, within myself. When it comes to self-love, when it comes to self-compassion, when it comes to having these protective factors in place, boundaries, things like that, self-worth, self-esteem, all these different techniques help to improve upon and build on those. Yeah.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, it's Ator again. Sorry to interrupt the show, but I want to tell you about something I'm really excited about. If you've been listening for a while, you know how important it is to take time for self-reflection and growth. That's exactly why I've created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. This is a 6-session online workshop designed specifically for men. Whether you're looking to explore your identity, challenge societal expectations, or simply find a creative outlet to process your life, this workshop gives you the space to do that. It's not about being a professional writer. It's about telling your story, digging deep, and connecting with others on the same journey. Each session is filled with prompts and discussions that will help you understand yourself better, all in a supportive and open environment. So if you want a way to write, reflect, and share, join me for Ink and Authenticity. Just visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more and register. Now let's get back to the show. And do you use this approach in your private practice as well?
I do. I've started to, especially after the book has come out. And I do have one lady I'm working with, and it's not for addiction, it's for something else, but she's actually going through the book, going through the questions, going through the actual items for what she's been through, which is actually more trauma-based. So it's really cool to see that from that perspective. So it can be applied to a certain degree with a lot of different concerns, anything that can separate me from myself. Of course, there are certain ones that, like detour from relapse. I mean, obviously that can be predominantly addiction focused, but I mean, that could also be if I'm trying to maybe change a habit that's not, that I don't want to go back to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that most of the folks that you work with using this are dealing with addiction, or does it go across all of the different things?
It goes across all of it. I mean, predominantly those that are going to be in addiction will be using it, but I do and have seen that some of the people I work with have read the book, and addiction is not their primary concern. So, yeah.
Without giving away anyone's experience, so without violating anyone's confidence, is it possible for you to walk through a couple of examples of how real people have applied this in their lives to sort of gain mastery over, what's been hurting them?
Yeah, the book's been out for about 2 months, and so I haven't had a lot of time to see someone go through the whole thing and see how it's been for them. However, I'll give you a small piece where somebody was going through what's called repeated confusion, and that's in the white belt. So how do I work through confusion when I'm going on my journey? And for her, it's very much trauma based. And one of the questions given to me was, well, I'm confused about what you mean, Eric, by prayer being like something I could use. And I said, well, you find out what it means for you. For this person, they come from a certain religious background where prayer was only instigated a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's learning, okay, how can you make it yourself? But also, you know what? If prayer doesn't work for you, then there's other things to try. I want to let you know that with this book, just because it's something that's suggested doesn't mean that maybe it works entirely for you. So you take what you want, and leave the rest. At least be curious, don't have any contempt prior to investigation, but after investigation, if you find it doesn't work, okay. And so it was a good discussion with that, which allowed her to be more empowered to be like, okay, well, I'll try it. If it doesn't work, I'll go with something else. And that's one example of somebody.
You had mentioned earlier that for you, like mindfulness, martial arts are a practice. Actually, I'm not sure martial arts is a practice, are a practice. Because martial arts is plural, but practice is singular. So I have to ask one of my proofreaders at work. But seriously, that for you, martial arts is a practice, much like mindfulness. And I'm curious, do you find that when it comes to your emotional and mental health, that the skills that you've learned in your years of doing martial arts help you to navigate your life and navigate the world?
Yes, for sure. There's even physical examples where, being in certain situations where I need to listen to my gut, and in martial arts, it's definitely discussed about, listening to your body, just as it's talked about in mindfulness with meditation. So there's been times when I've lived in certain areas where I did need to listen to my gut and realize, okay, this is a situation I need to get out of. If I can avoid a fight, that's the best. Because martial artists are not supposed to be seeking out a fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a part of it too with the way I live life is I don't seek out, try to instigate fights either verbally or physically. I'm trying to find a place of diplomacy. And yes, if I have to defend myself verbally or with boundaries or physically, then I'll have to defend myself. And so that's a big piece. But also I've had to learn assertiveness as well. And that came through martial arts also because when I was learning sparring, I was either very passive or very aggressive. Like I had to get pushed. It was hard for me to find the sweet spot, So I was often quite passive with the sparring. I was like, oh, here we go. That's probably part of my introverted self coming out. I had to learn how to find that place of, okay, I'll do this, but I don't have to go into beast mode and rip somebody's head off. Nor do I have to go into, shy Pied Piper that sits in the corner. So I will find my space between the two. And that's a big part of it too, is learning assertiveness, even in daily life with other folks, with people I know outside the counseling room and also inside the counseling room too, when I need to suggest something.
Yeah. So in your work as a counselor, what do you find is the most pervasive problem that drives people to depression, addiction, anxiety, and all that kind of thing? Like, for example, in my experience as a coach and a leader, a men's group leader, for me, the thing that I find that affects people most is the sense of enoughness, that just everybody thinks they're not enough. And that's the number one thing that I find myself working with people around and helping them to combat. And I'm curious, in your line of work, in your counseling practice, what do you find are the biggest triggers for people for addiction and anxiety and depression?
Shame.
Yeah.
Which goes along with, I don't feel like I'm enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about shame?
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to bring up one of those recovery concepts in the book, acceptance is the first of those terms I talk about, and they're all in alphabetical order because I didn't want to make it too crazy for people. There had to be some kind of order. So acceptance with martial arts is that the opponent, otherwise known as addiction, could saunter around a corner at any time. And just like with shame, there could be something that comes up where, I start to feel that, or something happens in my life. It might be out of my control or in my control to a certain extent. And so that's where we come in with shame, is acceptance of who I am as a person, flaws and all. But that's what shame doesn't want us to do, is see that acceptance of us, that, okay, I'm not perfect. I may be perfectly imperfect. I'm not, I'm not going to ever be perfect. But that's what the shame wants to drive someone, that I'm not enough. I'll never be perfect. And so shame, actually, there was a book that I read, I think it's called Spiritual Suicide. And that's what this lady talks about, is shame denoted as spiritual suicide, because shame will disconnect me from myself, others, and a higher power, if I believe in a higher power or a higher presence. Mm-hmm. So it's really a severance from belonging. It's a severance from self-love. It's a severance from connection with others that could give me a lot of strength and hope and experience. It's severance from there being any possibility of change. And that's a few of the reasons why I see shame as being so utterly pervasive.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Earlier in the conversation, you tossed out the words in this order: self-love, self-compassion, self-worth, and self-esteem. And I feel like that connects with what you were just saying.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead. No, please.
Yeah, the reputation I have with myself, with self-esteem, self-compassion, is that ability to give myself that space, and self-love, which very much goes against self-pity, which shame loves to thrive in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
One of the tools that I try and give the men that I work with is, I always say that the cure-all for almost every condition is being present. So not reliving the past, not spinning out into fear of the future, but noticing what is true in the moment and dealing in the moment with what is. And I don't come from a martial arts background. I have a very short martial arts background. I played around with BJJ for a little bit and loved it, but then life got in the way, and I moved away from the dojo. I moved to another town where we didn't have one, and so it was not possible for me to continue. And I came to it late in life, but I feel like there is a commonality there with that sense of being present, of being in the moment and being in the now. and dealing with what is on its own terms. How does that resonate with you?
It's such a big piece of it. And yeah, you literally moved away. Eh? So
Yeah, I literally moved
yeah,
away.
yeah, it's a big part when it comes to community in the martial arts dojo. That was a big part for me. Now, the first time I did martial arts when I was around like 10 to 12, it was a bigger dojo, and then it was a very small, tight-knit group. We called it the Snake Pit. It was a bit more challenging. Not everybody stayed. Some people came for a little bit, and then some left, but there was a core group that stayed throughout the entirety of the black belts. And there was only one group of us that got to black belt from the beginning of the dojo being open. And so we had that experience with each other. And so I think there's a big part of that journey where I don't want to say it's traumatic bonding, but it's that might be a bit of a strong term, but we were able to go through these experiences like a community where I feel I belong. And I feel like, Tori, as you mentioned earlier, I don't feel like enough. In that area, I usually do feel like I'm enough. You know, in doing the techniques and learning the stances and how to balance properly and all that stuff. So it's a really, yeah. And we joke around too. Like one time I said to my sensei, he mentioned like his wife was going to be graduating. And of course, being a 16, 17-year-old kid, I said, "Oh, what, from high school?" And we all laughed. He looked at me like he was going to hit me right. But I felt safe enough, to talk about that kind of thing. And, sometimes people did actually get hurt. One guy got hit upside the eyebrow with an eskrima stick because we did work with some weapons, and we had to take him to the hospital. But, we had the availability to help one another out, if emotionally or even physically if it happened.
Yeah. But I want to go back.
Sure.
Because my question was slightly different. And that was really about being present in the sense of being in the now, being in the moment. And I'm feeling like there's a certain commonality between my sense of counseling people or coaching people to be present and your practice, your martial arts practice, and how that manifests in its daily in your daily existence. Is this notion of being present and being in the now part of that practice? Because that's how it's sounding to me, and I just want to see if I'm capturing this correctly.
Yeah, and sorry about going totally off into a left-hand.
That's quite all right. That was a fun detour. I would take that detour 9 times out of 10.
Okay. Yeah. So when it comes to being centered, to being present, yes. Because I definitely had to be present with martial arts. My mind couldn't be somewhere in the past or where I wanted to be an hour from then. Mm-hmm. And just like when I work with people in counseling and even in daily life, when I'm talking with folks, yeah, I want to be present. I want to be present at what's happening in my body and what I'm feeling, but also being present for what they're going through as well. So yes, absolutely. It's a huge piece. And I think shame wants us to be getting pulled back. I'm not good enough, getting pulled back to the past or not being able, or you won't be doing any good in the future. So helping me be more so in a place where I can control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your vibe is so calm and kind. And I'm curious if that's just, have you always been that way? Or is this a product of the way that you practice these different techniques?
By the way, thank you. I've gotten that compliment before. Appreciate that.
Sure.
I do feel it's been with me for most of my life. I do believe that the martial arts has only reinforced that about myself. And I say that because when I was younger, I was playing basketball and my coach took me aside. I was shedding tears about something. I don't even know what I was shedding tears about. And he said, Eric, you're really tenderhearted. And, for a younger kid, especially boy, as I was, I did not want to hear that.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you're wrong, but yeah, he was right. And so I feel like that's been something that it's been with me personality wise, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I came into counseling, because of the
Hmm.
my calmness. I'm not a very high charged extroverted individual. Not to say that those people can't be in counseling, but for
Right.
me, that's what I think helped bring me in a little bit.
Yeah. Well, as long as you open that door,
Yeah.
let's go through that. Let's walk through that door that you just opened. So
Sure.
how did you find yourself pursuing a career in counseling?
I did my bachelor's in psychology, and after that, I was wondering, what do I want to do after getting a bachelor's in psych? Because there's not, after researching, not a lot of possibilities out there.
Hmm.
And where I went to school, there was a master's in clinical mental health counseling, and I already knew a lot of the teachers from undergrad that were teaching in graduate school, and it just seemed to be a good fit for me.
Hmm.
I'd always had an interest in psychology and counseling, even when I took AP psychology in high school. And so it really just followed on from there. And I really enjoy working with folks. I really enjoy the kind of the puzzle, the mystery, the part of human behavior. And so that was part of the drive as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Earlier, you mentioned incorporating prayer into the practice. And I'm curious if having some understanding of a higher power or something to pray to is a key element of applying these practices.
It is to me personally, as a professed Christian, it does help me. I would never pronounce that onto someone else that I work with professionally for boundaries and just for like ethically. However, I do feel like for if someone can find something that is of a higher power, whether that's nature, universe, God, whatever it may be, I think I think it does help. Spirituality, other terms that we could use are freedom and humanity, because with addiction, it's a slave driver. It takes away
Mhm.
it strips away freedom, humanity, those pieces. And so with spirituality, I get that freedom and humanity back. Um, so I do feel, yeah, that there's a strong component if I have some type of structure. Of course, I don't have to necessarily define a higher power, because usually that higher power will define me with my experiences. So, I don't have to put the higher power in a box. However, just have some semblance of a direction can help. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what else would you want people to know that we haven't talked about yet?
What else would I like people to know? Well, yeah, well, the book is out. I'm writing another book. Yeah, so it's 138 pages in. It does involve a certain section from the book that has been released in regards to my dad. He was buried alive accidentally at a certain point. Thankfully, he did survive. And the next book is a little bit about that story, but also 4 concepts for self-help on how to free ourselves out of the dirt metaphorically. And so that's my next book.
You have now practiced professionally as a counselor in both the United States and Canada. And I am curious how that's different. How is it different in Canada versus the United States? Or is it?
There are some differences when it comes to the population I'm working with. I'm working with so many people from so many different walks of life and countries here in Calgary, where I'm at in Canada. In the States, yeah, it was usually, white, black, some Hispanic of the population. So, I mean, it's just, I've been able to see so many different countries and learn from so many people from different countries. And also, when it comes to even the workplace environment, it seemed like the United States was a lot more stringent when it came to the balance. Like I would have to accrue days, like one day a month. And it seemed like it was a little bit better in Canada, not like extremely, but at least I felt like there was more of a balance,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I was getting burnt out in the States, actually, when I was working in the inpatient treatment center. It was just, it was just a very volatile environment. I'll keep it simple.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Is there a difference in character between the folks you've met in the U.S. and the folks you've met in Canada in terms of the way they deal with addiction, the way they deal with trauma? Or is it, are we just all fundamentally the same?
I did find that I learned a lot more when I came to Canada when it came to addiction. Like, I started to understand, at least this is a perspective. It's not like the only perspective that there's one addiction, no such thing as addictions. It's just addiction that manifests in a lot of different ways as symptoms, like cocaine, gambling, alcohol, Dilaudid, whatever it is. And so I started to simplify the language a little bit up here. And I was able to actually work for a addiction doctor when I first came to Canada in a place here in Calgary, an outpatient clinic. And I learned so much from him because he had been in the field for, well, decades. He actually helped write the definition that ASAM and CSAM, so Canadian Society of Addiction Medicine and American Society of Addiction Medicine, what they actually use for addiction. So when I was in Mississippi, it was not like that. I was really flying by the seat of my pants. I never took a course in addiction. It was very much sink or swim, trial by fire.
Yeah.
A little bit of that in Canada, but I was learning so much when I came to the country. Yeah.
You also counsel your patients or clients, I should say, in EMDR as well. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about your EMDR practice?
Yeah, so I learned it all online. I did the training online with a bunch of people from a lot of different parts. It was actually a trainer in the States. And yeah, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I can do that either virtually, like we're doing a tour, or I can do it in person. And so it does use bilateral stimulation, eye movements. It can also use like tapping or auditory stimulation. I usually do the eye movements for that. And it's a very somatic based therapy that's been around since the 80s. And it's all about being able to change maladaptive, self-defeating beliefs about myself. We'll use the example like I am not enough. And we changed that through the therapy to a positive core belief such as I am enough. And we usually will use a traumatic memory that's attached to that negative cognition. So I could go through a trauma where maybe I was raped or I was beaten and it makes me think I am not enough or I'm not safe or whatever. And then through an 8-phase process in EMDR, there's 8 phases, we will change that core belief to positive and desensitize the person to that memory.
Fascinating. Because I have heard so many people talk about it, and I've never experienced it, and I haven't read that much about it either. So I don't know what it looks like in real terms. I do know that a lot of people find it very effective.
Yeah. I mean, I had a case example with a parent that was having unwanted sexual thoughts regarding their children, and it was coming out of nowhere. The person did not know where this was coming from. So we were able to take a particular event, we were able to pinpoint, and then change a certain core belief to another core belief that's positive. And after a certain number of treatments, those unwanted sexual thoughts were able to go away for that person.
Wow.
And so it's just amazing to see the power of that therapy. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I want to go back momentarily to the book, your book, that is. You said Striking self-sabotage begins with a single move. What does that mean?
I believe it means taking that first step with faith, taking that first step toward a different avenue, starting to garner a little bit of trust that things could be different, starting to connect with myself a little bit more than I did yesterday. And so that's what I would start to implement with that. And of course, they can go into the techniques and starting to work on uncertainty. However, I do feel generally it's all about giving myself that space, even a little bit more space today, a little bit more trust, a little bit more opportunity to see that things can be different.
Who's the book for? Who's the ideal person to use this approach? Or does this approach work for everybody, you think?
I feel that the approach can be helpful for people even if they haven't had a martial arts background, and I've gotten that feedback from people that have already read the book. I feel that it's for folks that do like to have more of a kind of like a step-by-step type of structure to something, because we go through, white, yellow, orange, purple, blue, brown, black, I think belts. I think that's one's green's in there too. And so, for someone that likes that structured approach, for someone that is willing to do some introspection work and look inside themselves, it's beneficial in that regard. And just someone that's ready to have a change for themselves.
Yeah. Is there a workbook component to this? Or are there just exercises in the book? How is this? How do you apply this in your life as you go through the book?
Yeah, so it's interesting you asked the question, Tor, because I actually did consider making a workbook down the line when it's a lot more established. I did use a particular chapter in the book. It's called Practical Simulation. And that chapter is all about some journal. So I go through the 66 different techniques again, and each of those techniques has a certain number of questions to journal about, to start to write about. And so, like for thundering uncertainty, when is one time you have felt uncertain? That might be one of the questions. And then there's a particular piece for relationships for each of those 66, for like intimate relationships or just general relationships. And then there's what I call vulnerable striking points. And so in martial arts, that would be like striking points I would use with Kenpo, like with maybe certain pressure points or certain limbs. But when it comes to this, it's striking points metaphorically to help me implement this with actionable steps.
Yeah.
So, And each of the 66 has that. And then I have an inventory at the end of that for some really high level questions. Like, what are the three three primary or the most needed you need to work on, like moving forward, the three that you feel like, you're doing really good in, that kind of thing at the end of the book. And then actually the 12 steps of recovery, I actually translate into martial arts. I guess you could call it jargon, terminology. Right.
Yeah. Does this metaphorical approach seem to be resonating with folks?
I think so. I think that and it's interesting because someone that I work with, do I want to bring that up? Well, maybe I won't bring that one up, but someone I do work with, I can say this, the person really enjoys the metaphors. They enjoy the imagery of it all. It's something that's easy for people to remember because it's they can attach it to something like entangled values. I'm getting entangled in my values. It's not supposed to be a negative concept. It's like, I'm getting enraptured, entangled. They're within me,
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we have two questions that we ask every guest on the podcast. And since you are in the hot seat, it is your turn.
Oh boy.
Question number 1 is, what does the word authenticity mean to you?
Authenticity to me means a genuine search within myself. Yeah, a genuine search within myself as far as thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, experiences, and how I can apply those things to me moving forward.
Good answer. Excellent answer. Question number 2 is your chance to freestyle. And that is, I wish people could have seen that. I wish this were a video podcast now so that folks could see what you just did. That was hilarious. What is the one question you wish that I had asked you that I didn't ask you?
I believe it's always an interesting question to me. And there has been times where someone has asked it to me before, and I regret and sometimes wish I could have said something different or more. It's, if you were speaking with somebody that's getting into the counseling field, therapy field, psychologist, what would you want them to know? Because I wish that I would have been able to have a podcast 13 plus years ago and be able to hear what someone might have had to say.
So what would you want someone to know?
I would say to anybody out there, if you're listening and you are starting in the field, whether you're in the States or Taiwan or Canada or wherever you're at, is to don't be afraid to ask the hard questions to yourself, but also to the people that you work with. Because part of it's going to be being uncomfortable with that client in certain therapy situations. And oftentimes that means asking those questions that maybe, they need to maybe think about, but you don't want to maybe hurt their feelings or you want their approval. So an example could be, asking about shame, or what's, a question with alcohol could be, what's one thing that the alcohol has not wanted anybody else to know? So it's asking questions like that. And also be gentle on yourself. Give yourself some self-compassion. You're not going to get it by Thursday, as the quote says. And also knowing that, when it comes to schooling, that's all discovery, yet learning will continue into the profession as it has for me. I'm continuously learning. And so don't ever feel like, there's a stopping point. That's going to be constant learning about yourself and about therapy modalities, all that. And I would also say, be able to take, good notes, because it's going to help you in the next session when it comes to prepping and planning for the session. And a good intake is really important. A good assessment is really important for folks. And don't be afraid to refer if you feel like it's not in your scope of practice. I've had to do that too, where I'm like, don't think like this is a good fit. Let's look at some other possibilities for you.
That's a hard thing for all of us as professionals to do, not just therapeutic professionals, but in any profession. It's tough. Especially as guys, we don't want to admit that we don't know how to do something, or that something is beyond our ability.
Oh, it's so tough. It was so tough for me too the first time I had to do it, because I really wanted to it's a consult route. I want to take this client on, but I knew deep down that, I don't specialize in this, and I won't be able to go to where she needed to go. So
right.
It's so tough. I totally agree, Tori. It is so difficult.
Yeah. Any final thoughts? Anything that we haven't shared that you'd like to share?
Tori, I don't think so. I want to say thank you for having me on. Thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity. And I hope that everyone gets at least one nugget out of the talk today. Yeah. Yeah,
me too. If you, not you, Eric, if the listeners, if you, the listener, would like to get in touch with Eric or find out more about what he does and his very unique approach You can visit his website at recoveryartscounseling.com. So that's recoveryartscounseling.com. You can check out his blog that is also on his website. He has some great stuff in there. You can go to Amazon or your favorite book purveyor for his book, The Martial Art of Recovery. And then there's all the usual things of LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, that kind of stuff. Eric Fisher is who you're looking for. And all of those links will be in the show notes. So don't feel like you have to write any of this down. You can just check the show notes for all those links. And Eric, I just want to give you one more heartfelt thank you. I really, really appreciate you being here, taking time out of your busy schedule to sit with us. This has been awesome. This has been really a fascinating look at something that, a fascinating perspective on something that we hear about all too often, depression and trauma and addiction. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome, Ator, and thank you for the work that you do as well.
Oh, golly. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And so, folks, with that, it is time to throw the bags back into the jalopy and head back out onto the Authenticity Road. So, on behalf of the show, I am Ator, and until the next time we meet, please be authentic. Goodbye, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope what you've heard will help you on the road to your personal authenticity.
Visit us at www.authenticityroad.online.